There's been some probing, however, by the media, real questions emerging about who authorised this curfew. Well, the Premier said it was a public health directive. Only the Chief Health Officer, Brett Sutton, said, wasn't me. Today we find out not the police either.
Were police consulted about the introduction of a curfew?
No.
Were you at no stage?
No. The reality is I was never consulted. I've made inquiries to determine if anyone within the organisation was briefed on the matter, and as best as I can work out, our policy area was provided a copy of the proposed guidelines for our information a couple of hours before they were signed off.
One of the Australians' best, Victorian state political reporter Rachel Baxendale, she's all over this. She joins me now from Melbourne. Rachel, help us out here. If the police are saying it's not us, and the health officials are saying it's not us, but the Premier says he's only putting in place these tough restrictions because he has to, because that's what the experts are telling him. Well, that's all been blown apart today, hasn't it?
It has. It's all quite bizarre, Peter. Good evening, and thanks for having me. The Premier today, continually said that he makes decisions on the basis of the advice of experts. But when he was pressed numerous times to say, who these experts are who came up with the curfew, he refused to name anyone. Interestingly, we've had both the Chief Health Officer and the Victoria Police Chief both distance themselves and say that, they don't necessarily disagree with this curfew, but it wasn't their idea. And they've, been more than willing to say that it wasn't their idea. Andrews has effectively said that, ultimately he's the Premier, so he takes responsibility for the decision. But it's all a bit bizarre for him, to continually say he's made it on the advice of experts, but refused to name a single expert.
And we also know that sort of outside the health bureaucracy in Victoria, there's world-class epidemiologists and experts in their state all saying that they don't need or don't support a curfew, that it has all of these other really serious health implications. Today, you and one of our own, Andrea Crothers, put the Premier under some pressure. He wasn't overly responsive. Let's have a listen.
What advice was it made on, though? The Chief Health Officer said he didn't advise it.
Decisions
are made. Said he didn't advise it. Who advised it?
Well, as I've said to you, the government always reserves the right to go beyond detailed advice.
Why won't you say who advised it, though? Who gave the idea?
Well, the government acts on advice where that's appropriate, and the government reserves the right to make decisions.
They say it wasn't their idea, and the choice said it wasn't his idea. Whose idea?
Well, as I've said to you before, Rachel, if people find fault with that rule or any other rule, then they can find fault with me.
I'm not talking about whether there's fault with the rule. I'm just asking whose idea it was.
Well, decisions are made by groups of people, and I can't necessarily pinpoint for you the exact individual and the exact moment that it was suggested that we put a curfew on.
They're pretty temperate and reasonable questions, but why the games?
It's all quite bizarre. And look, Peter, it really reminds me of the situation we find ourselves in trying to get to the bottom of the hotel quarantine debacle, to be honest. The key problem there is continually we sort of said, well, which department was responsible for this? Which minister? Who was actually responsible? And we just get these opaque, murky, very wordy, but absolutely, no detail answers that just don't answer the question whatsoever from the Premier and from other ministers, including his Health Minister Jenny Mikakos on the hotel quarantine issue, that just really don't tell us anything. And you're left wondering, well, do they actually know who's in charge? And if they don't, that's a huge problem. But if they do and they won't say it is, then, then evidently they're covering something up, and that's also a great concern.
A lot of anger today. I've had a lot of people actually on the show in the last few days since the Sunday roadmap to recovery was anything but. A lot of business leaders, influential Melbourne people are saying there must be a real plan for recovery. It's got to happen. They're angry. What's the likely outcome? Because the Premier announced on Sunday that he would have business relief and support out there. The PM said on Monday, show us the money, Premier, before you ask the Commonwealth for any more. People are really concerned.
Absolutely, they are. There's huge mounting pressure, and interestingly, the Premier said today that it may not even be October 26th when this curfew and the stay-at-home restrictions are lifted, which will effectively mean by that stage Victorians will have been under continuous stage 3 or stage 4 lockdown, or Melburnians will, for 16 weeks, which will mean we've spent 22 of weeks this year, so more than half the year to October we will have spent in lockdown, and businesses need a way forward. This was already crippling them. Now they don't even know when they can open their doors. They don't know what fiscal assistance they're going to get, and every day that passes, there is huge pressure on the Andrews government to tell them what the way forward is and what kind of support they'll receive.
I made the point before that your questions are reasonable and they're temperate, but clearly you're getting under the Premier's skin. You're also getting under the skin of his wife, Catherine Andrews, because I understand from reports today she's blocked you on Twitter. She's blocked you and she's blocked the Herald Sun's Alex White. Now, to me, this is a bit like Year 9 high school girls.
Absolutely.
But you're also copying, for asking these questions, and they're reasonable questions, you're copying death threats. I mean, you've had some pretty brutal attacks levelled at you. I just find this extraordinary. It's all beyond the pale. Is it going to put you off pushing him in the press conferences?
No, look, it's not, Peter, and I really do find it quite bizarre. As you say, it was like being back in Year 9. It was all a bit Mean Girls. I think I said to Alice Workman when she got in touch with me about it. The whole thing with Catherine Andrews. But I do receive relentless messages on Twitter at the moment from the I Stand With Dan crowd. And I guess the point I'd make to people is I'm not an ideologue, I'm not a commentator, I'm just a journalist who's trying to get to the bottom of what's happening in Victoria at the moment, at a time when our Premier's never had more power over our lives, for better or worse. I'm just asking the questions that people at home are sending to me a lot of the time. People stuck at home, people losing businesses, people losing jobs, people losing family members. And it does get immensely frustrating. The Premier is very good at not answering questions, but it's my job to keep asking them, and that's what I'm going to do.
Rachel Baxendale, thank you very much for your time. Keep it up. Good work. If you're a Labor MP, you'd probably call it misogynist.